Hi, I'm going to give a quick introduction to a new package called Sequences that's available in Unity. Can't remember exactly, it was a fairly new version. I'm actually using 2021.2, a beta of it. I think it came out in a slightly earlier version. If you look in the asset store, there is actually a Cinematic Studio sampler, and it's got a complete example project. I'm not using that. I'm actually going to the latest 2021.2 beta, and in there's this new concept called features. And what features are is when you select a feature and add it, it picks a group of packages and all their dependencies, and then it works out the version number based on the version number of the Unity editor automatically. So it'll pick the best version for 2021 beta 12. And so when I get to a new beta, it may actually update these package version numbers automatically. And so it's an interesting idea. It's a new thing in Unity called features. And so I wanted gameplay and storytelling, 3D character animation, and Cinematic Studio. And because they're all just picking packages and there's a separate lookup table somewhere or other of which ones to use for a project, I won't get conflicting version numbers on my project. So that was interesting. But it's the sequences packages in particular that I'm using. I thought I'd give a quick introduction to it if you're not familiar with it. So what sequences allows you to do is there's a sequences window, there is a sequence assembly window, which I actually don't use, but I'll tell you what it is if I can bring it up. Sequence assembly, and you can use these to build up your own scenes. And what it allows you to do a sequence, if I come back to sequences, is you can build 3 levels at most. So you can just use 1 level, but you can use 1, 2, or 3 levels of these things called sequences. And what they are, why it's useful to me is because they've got timelines associated with it. So if I want to create a new timeline, all I have to do is go right click, create sequence, and it will create another timeline for me, wires it all up. It just reduces the manual effort. And so what I do is I use the top level sequence for the episode because I'm creating a series of episodes. I'm using a different location grouping. I'll come into that in a moment. And then I've got a timeline per shot. And so each shot's only a few seconds long. For me, they're not particularly long, so these are like camera shots. Sometimes I lie and I sneak a couple into the same one, but it just wasn't worth worrying about. So I call these all shots. I put these numbers on it so if I can come back and I can insert another one in between, like a shot 15, and I just give it a number in between. And so each of these levels has got a number. So I've got episodes starts from 1, 2, 3. Locations, I give them numbers as well. This is the location in the movie. So if the episode 1 goes to this same location twice, I might have a location 10 and a location 30, because there was a location 20 that is often another project. It's got all the assets for the other project. And the reason I don't put all the locations into the one project is I started that way and it just got too slow because I had a massive project and everything got sluggish. So now I create a Unity project per location, drag all the assets in for that location, but I may still within one episode use it. And so over time I'm going to have multiple episodes. I haven't completed my first episode yet, so I'm going to have multiple episodes over time, and then all the ones for this location, which is in, I call it downtown. So it's got some assets, some characters and so forth. Yeah. Now another little trick is that I'm actually using, so in the hierarchy, if I come over here and have a look at the timeline, so the timeline is very important for this. If I go into the top level one, so you have to have a scene and everything goes into that scene, and you've got to remember the right scene for the right assets. So I just create one scene for the whole project. I create one scene per episode, so I can get everything for one episode in one file, and I can then, if I know the sequence I want, I can work out the scene file name and try and remember the right one, because it doesn't give you any help trying to work out which scene that you've put all this into. But there's a scene that it's got to go in parallel to these objects, because it actually creates objects within the scene, and you can't, it's a bit of a pain to sort of manually create them afterwards. So the top level one represents that, is the top level sequence, and down here in the timeline it's got this new sequences track. Oh, ignore those little error messages. I don't know what it is. It's probably completely unrelated. The little sequences, and so it's got the child one. In this case, I've only got one child, which is location 10. Sometimes you've got to get in here and drag it out longer. So it is something you do need to understand, that this top level sequence has got a nested sequence, which is actually for the location. When I click on the location one, I've got another nested sequences track with all of the shots within it. And you can see shot 10, shot 20, shot and so forth. But I've also got this scene activation track, and because location 10, and frankly, because I've only got one scene per location, I might not need to do this, but if I ever want to merge it all back into the one project again later, I thought I would do it this way. So location 10 activates this scene. This scene is another scene, but it's like a Unity scene. It's got all of the location, so it's actually all the background images, like all the background contents without the characters. And then for each, when I get down to the next level, like a shot, I expand that out, I've got all the characters for this particular shot. I've got a separate copy of them. So you create them for prefabs, and then every single shot has got a separate set of characters, and just deploy them all again over and over again. And yeah, I'll get into this in a little bit more detail. So this is now the way that Unity describes in the manual. They don't sort of dictate you've got to use it one way, but the tools sort of encourage you to use it a particular way. And I just don't. That didn't fit my workflow, so I don't do that. But I'll explain what the standard way of doing it is, and then I'll show what I'm doing. So the standard sort of way is you have these things called assets, and you can have a collection. So there's a whole lot of lighting assets, and these are all prefabs that you sort of set up and you can make available. And the idea is then you can drag these into a shot, and they've actually got, you create it creates prefab variants of the base one for every single clip you're going to do. A sequence assembly makes it easy to you sort of pick one of the sequences over here, and then normally you'd have a whole lot of assets dropped in here, and when you click plus, you can sort of sorry, if you click plus, it adds one to this list, but I actually don't have one. But you can have all these variants which show you all the things, and so for every single shot you could have a different variant for the different shot, because it's got the timeline is actually over here underneath the character. It's not sort of stored within the shot. I didn't like that, and I don't know if I explained it well, but I really liked this hierarchy of timelines, and I wanted to drop all the characters directly into the timeline. So I've got this one massive timeline down here with everything, and I can line it all up between all the tracks. It was introducing another layer, so it actually dragged this timeline in under here instead, because you'd have this sequence asset prefabs that would get dropped into here, and then you'd pick which of the things underneath. But it meant that my character, like Sam, was going to have a drop-down list of every single recording for every single location of every single episode at every single shot, and it'd be a massive drop-down list here. I didn't want that, so I dropped it all as characters directly into the scene. I'm not saying what they've done is wrong. It's just I didn't like it because I was worried about the number of them I was going to get, and it's sort of like, this is giving me nesting. I've got episodes within episodes, I've got locations within locations, I've got shots. I like that nesting, and then when it got to the characters and all the things that you want to animate in it, then the character had a list of animation clips that you recorded for every single episode, location, shot that you wanted. You'd create a prefab variant for every single distinct recording clip, and so suddenly I lost this nice nesting. I didn't have animation clips for this shot. I had animation clips for the character, which would list out every single one of these, and so it'd be an enormous drop-down list by the time I've got to multiple episodes, knowing that I haven't completed a single episode yet. So I don't know if I explained that very well, but the end result is I don't use sequence assembly because it deals with these prefabs. The prefabs have their own timelines associated with it. Each timeline has all the animation clips associated with it. It's nested if that model works well for you. it didn't work for me. And as a result, I don't use these asset collections, because this is all the things that you can get out of it. There's this alignment between these sequence assembly and these assets. But what I did like is I did like the idea of having all these things ready to go, and I could just click and they would re-dropped into the scene for me. So I wrote my own crude, crappy little script where I've typed in, I've got all my own characters now, and I can drop them into a scene really quickly. So I've used the characters, props, lighting, and photography. This script is in the show notes. I've given a link to it. It's the sort of thing I'd just take and hack. And I'll talk about this script a little bit more, but what it then does is I create all my tracks directly, all the animation tracks and so forth are directly in this shot sequence. And so I can animate things around, and I see all of the characters, all of the prefabs, all of the recorder tracks, which create a video clip for me, the camera animation, and I can line them all up really easily if I need to get the timing right. That I want to get the head turns, and maybe something's happening on the other character going at the same time, and the camera is meant to move around. I can get all of this all going in. I just find it easier to line up this way. That's personal. So for example, if I've currently got the selected up here, and if I want to add Liana, I go, I've got the scene, and I just go click, and she gets dropped in. Now, some of the magic of this script, actually won't go have a quick look at the script. You can always fast forward if you don't want to look at the script. But what the script does is, it's an example of creating your own windows. So even if you just think that want to write how to write your own windows, well, here's some example code for doing it. So it's called assembly. That's the title of the window. I've got these 4 groups for adding these categories for characters, props, lighting, and photography. Those seem to be the ones I was using out of these. I haven't used the other ones. I don't need audio myself. I didn't use sets because I'm using this other set scene sort of scheme. But what you could do is have a different set get loaded up for each one of your shots. I didn't find that necessary. Props are things like, the bag as a prop. The characters these are characters. The lights is useful. The photography is useful. And so I just went through and picked my own. And then what I do is a little bit of an interesting thing. I have a shared package that I share across projects. That's where all my characters go. And then I've got a local directory. And so it's looking in an assembly prefabs directory in both the shared area and my local area. So I can have props and stuff that is relative just for this project, but I can also have them shared, and I'll look in both when it's trying to load them. It runs through those directories, finds them all. That's how so these buttons I didn't add manually. It ran through the project directory. So let's try and find it. Come up for local assembly prefabs. I don't have any in this particular project. They're all shared at the moment. So I'm going to close off local, come into shared. Here's the 4 subdirectories. Here's all the characters. Just by creating a new character and dropping it in there, it gets added into as one of these buttons. I couldn't work out a nice way to lay out the buttons, so feel free to do a better job. I just put 4 in a row at most, and this is just how it came out, and it's good enough. And so I clicked Liana, she get dropped into the scene, and what it also did for me was it created an animation track down the bottom for me, so I can just start dragging animation clips in down to here to animate it. Cool, so let's go back and have a little bit more look at the code, just out of curiosity. So I'm using mini buttons, got bold labels. I run through all the assets. This is creating all the buttons. I removed prefab and variant off the end of the name. You might have noticed that the things were called Doug prefab variant. Well, I just saved Doug here, so it's just a bit of code to remove the prefab and the variant from the end of the name and trim off the white space. I lay them out every 4th one. I start a new row, and so they just expand to the width. So when you click on a button, what it does is so you'd pick your sequence over here first, and then you click the button. Otherwise, the button doesn't do anything. And it goes through the select. So that's the selected game object. It's doing it for each, but normally you'd only have one selected. It tries to find a playable director. If it's not, then you probably didn't click on one of these sequences, which has got a timeline associated with it, and so it gives up. Otherwise, I removed the code to make sure it didn't add it twice. I actually sometimes do want them twice. So then it tries to load the prefab. It instantiates it. It's got some undo code, which I hope works. It creates a new instance of the... so what it's doing here is, you might notice it dropped it right in the middle of my scene. And so I worked out where the scene was. And this is just some code. I'm not going to explain it all, but it's rotating the character to look back at you. It does a ray cast down, and so it dropped it on the ground. And so if it's within 2 meters of ground, it puts it down on the ground. And so the character ends up right in the right spot. And it's sort of 2 meters out from it. And so this is, you might find this code interesting to have a look at, just because it was sort of doing a little bit of fancy stuff. Lands it on the ground nicely. I don't have to fiddle around with it so much. It's standing up. If it's more than 3 meters above the ground, if it's less than 3 meters above the ground, it'll land it on the ground. Otherwise, I'll just leave it where it is, because it couldn't find out. It could be way off the screen and that'd be confusing. Then I look up the timeline, I add it to it, and at the end, I tell the timeline to refresh, to update, so you can actually see the character now in the refresh when it gets dropped. And so that's what the script does. And that's it. So it's not too bad, but that's an example of creating a window, but it's also a way, which it's doing the same thing as what they were doing, except they had an extra level of timeline nesting that I didn't like. And so I've got my things being added directly in, and it saves me heaps of time. Like, I do like the sequences package. I can just right click, go over here, right click, create new sequence, shot 400, click on it. What you have to do is you have to put the cursor in the timeline region to activate it, so it works out which one to actually use based on where the playhead is. But if I come down here, I go to my assembly, I say, well, I want Abigail, and I want Eleanor. I probably should have put them next to each other, and Mrs. B, and I can throw characters in there pretty quick. I'm going to need some lighting. I want some cameras, and it's adding all those things to the scene, so I can set up a shot quite quickly, drop all my characters in there, they're all on the ground. Then I have to move them around, I've got to animate them, I've still got to do work. But it's just done some of the legwork for me. And it does save a heap of time when you're trying to create lots and lots of episodes. So you might sort of say, well, why did you create a new copy of all these characters for every single shot? Why don't you just have a shot that spans and reuse a character across them? And the answer is you can. I actually found it easier to start a new shot every time. So here's an example of one. I think it's this one. Is it 50? 20. So you can actually create multiple recorder clips. And so here's a recorder clip, and the file name is like episode 1, location 1020. And then this one is location 30. So I didn't actually create a new shots timeline sequence because it just made sense to try and reuse. If I look at the game object, because the character flows through and I just move the camera around. But all the rest of the time was just quicker to reposition the characters and drop them exactly where I wanted it for this short little clip. And so every single shot pretty well, most of them start a new recording, have a new set of characters. And so I just go click, 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 drop them all in. And away I go and animating. So it was just a crash course into sequences with the nested timelines. I probably butchered the Unity standard way of using it, but I just wanted to describe also how I've put it together, leveraging what they've got, but instead of having nested another level of nesting where all the animation clips are recorded per character, I just drop the characters directly underneath the sequence, and then I add You got to remember to keep clicking in that region. And sometimes if you jump around the place, it forgets and doesn't load it back up, in which case you've got to click off somewhere else. I've reported a bug, and hopefully it'll get fixed. Sometimes it loses track of the current one because you see it's deactivating everything else. And so you've got to both click on the scene and put the playhead into it to get that to come back up, to get selected. Sometimes it loses track of it. You can click the preview on and off. Sometimes works. The other times is you just click off to another scene and click back, and hopefully they get all these bugs fixed bit by bit. But all up, I am finding it useful for myself in trying to create an animated movie. So I'm not trying to create a game, I'm trying to create an animated movie. And I am creating lots of little video clips. I then write all those video clips out. I'm using the, the recorder track, and with all these little clips, a file per clip, and then I just join all the clips together. In my case, I'm creating what's called a web story, and so I actually want separate video clips. But I've got some Python script that actually massages the video files and compiles them all together into what's called a web story at the end of the day. I have found that you've got the choice of the file format, and so you've got MP4 or WebM. I'm actually finding having more luck with WebM. MP4 seems to be trying to keep up with real time, and the video quality degrades sometimes as a result. Whereas when they use WebM, it slows down the gameplay but keeps the video quality better. So I'm actually these days using WebM for all the clips, and that's part of the reason for having this separate Python script. It converts the WebM into MP4 externally and puts it all back together again. Python just had some video editing libraries that were useful. Could have done it inside Unity probably. It just seemed easier to do in Python. And to me it's all about, hey, just get stuff done. I don't really want to learn tools if I don't have to. Anyway, crash course into sequences, not an official Unity way of using sequences. This is how I'm using sequences. Hopefully you found this interesting.